James would write this: pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Now put this together. Some translations say true religion. That's appropriate, the word pure and the word undefiled. The word pure is the word cleansing, being cleansed. Undefiled, spotless, or blameless, if you will. This is the first external description of religion, that your faith would have skin and you would demonstrate your faith through your works. How do I do that? He's like, visiting orphans, those that are fatherless, they're exposed, they don't have any support, and widows, those who are husbandless in their trouble. And by the way, it's not just external, it's internal. Keep yourself unspotted from the world. Never take one verse without explaining the context. Remember, in James 1, we have those most famous verses that we're not to just hear the word, we are to finish, do the word. Those are the verses that precede this verse. But he's not done. James is like, hey, how about not just hearing the word? How about doing the word? How about not being a forgetful hearer, like a man who looks at himself in the mirror, walks away, forgets what type of man he is with a reflection in the mirror, so he comes back. He goes, no, how about you look into the perfect law of liberty? How about you do the word? And then he says this: if anyone among you thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is worthless. Wait, what? Yeah, he's like, hey, hear the word, apply the word. By the way, it's not about your external traditions and rituals, because you can put on a good front and you can make this look really good. Meanwhile, on the inside, you're deceiving yourself, and your tongue and how you speak is betraying you. Your religion is worthless. Cue verse 27. You want true religion? You tend to the orphan and widow. You keep yourself unspotted from the ills of the world. What is he laying out? Not the definition of true religion. He's laying out the demonstration of true religion. He just uses orphans and widows as his case study. Who amongst us, he's convincing the church, who amongst us is uncovered and exposed and vulnerable and has no family support? Widows and orphans. So please understand, he's not giving the actual definition of true religion. He's giving the demonstration of true religion. True religion covers the vulnerable and cares for those in trouble, period. That's it. What does true religion do? Covers, that's the word, the vulnerable, the exposed, and it cares for those in trouble. Now, we understand from civilization to civilization, it's often women, children, and the elderly that are the most vulnerable. That's biblical, right? We often let the culture try to determine and decide how we should conduct ourselves. Like the progressive movement wants to level all of those, let's say, disparities, those differences in man and woman, right? And yet the Bible's like, no, the woman is always gonna be the weaker vessel. Not weaker intellectually, not weaker in your gifting, not weaker in your character, weaker physiologically. And the man is supposed to be the protector, right? And the home was a mini microcosm of how God intended the church home to be. The difference is in the home, the man is the head, he's the covering. If the man is out of place, the home, the wife and the children are exposed. They're more vulnerable if the man is not in his rightful biblical place. The difference is no man in the church is the head of the church. Jesus is the head of the church. But he has put in place men, qualified men, chapter 3 in our study, characterological qualifications of men who should be under shepherds in his proxy or stead. It's his body. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, when we get back to the idea of supporting widows, I think it's wise to first call out the men of the church to be the front lines of protecting and providing for our family of origin, but also protecting those amongst us in this spiritual family of origin. See, this world would love to expose women, children, and the elderly. They are. That's the enemy's tactic. Recently, this happened in broad daylight. See, what was once known as the Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972, which was a lid, not that a woman couldn't go beyond the lid, it was a lid that protected women and girls. It was a lid that covered at a time where women didn't have status, specifically voting status. This was implemented so that women can rise and not be discriminated against for their sex. Unfortunately, true to the spirit that's driving the White House, the Biden administration recently changed the definition of the word sex to include gender identity, so as a law that was a lid intended to protect women and girls in all types of public spaces now opens up those spaces to men biologically who are pretending to be women who can now enter into any of those spaces, whether locker rooms, whether bathrooms, whether sporting teams. That's insanity. That's depravity. The law was a lid, and now when it's removed, filth can flood in. Speaking of lids, lids are there to cover. On Friday of this past week, I was waiting for my brother, Bill, so we can go for a walk. And I was outside on our sidewalk, that side, and the weirdest thing happened. I fell through the sewer. Yes. It felt as if the earth beneath my feet gave way, and it did. Both my feet went into the sewer and my body hit the sidewalk, and now I am disoriented and I am completely confused. I was embarrassed. I thought, how did I not see a hole in the sidewalk? And then it dawned on me. It's because there wasn't a hole in the sidewalk. The entire lid, like a plate, shattered when I stepped on it. My first thought, as God is my witness, my first thought when I stood up in my mind was, better the shepherd than the sheep. And I literally was like, out of all the people that walk on that sidewalk, what are the odds of it being one of the pastors of the church? And there was an encouragement there, knowing that, man, what if another kid or a woman or the elderly walked on that? And that's what sent me on this little mini diatribe. The men of the church should be the ones that if we're gonna step on a lid that's compromised or exposed, we're the ones that go down, not women and children. And the same can be said, and it should be true for us as we tend to the category that Paul tells Timothy to be mindful of, the widows amongst us. He then says this, in case you think it's only the church's obligation. Verse 4, if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Notice what he says there. He is saying, yes, the church is a spiritual family, and the church is made up of separate families. And the church is supposed to support the families and women or widows that don't have any support themselves. But if there is children and grandchildren, they are the first line of defense. They are the spiritual, social security. Isn't that interesting in a day and age where that responsibility can be easily passed off? Out of all of the miracles that Jesus did, many of which involved resurrections. And if you study the resurrections, the amount of people he resurrected, or the Old Testament examples of resurrection, you discover that it always had a widow involved. There's something to that. Now, what's the point? The point is Jesus had to come and correct the religious leaders, how they were conducting themselves when it came to taking care of their own parents. I mean, that's the circle of life. Our parents took care of us. Our parents changed our diapers. Our parents fed us, provided for us. And at the end of their life cycle, the responsibility falls to the children or the grandchildren. That's the right way according to the scriptures. Now, that's going to look differently for all of us. Like I said, fingerprint, okay? There are mechanisms in place, nursing homes. The point of the account is they shouldn't be abandoned. Jesus said this, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. He said to them, all too well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is Corban," and then it's defined, that is, a gift to God, "then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do." Now, listen, the religious leaders would co-sign or advocate for, let's say, men in the religious community who had older parents, and instead of having their assets, their possessions be used to support their parents in their advanced age, they would, a man-made loophole, declare all of their resources, all of their bank accounts, all of their assets, Corban, which was saying, I can't give it to my parents because I've dedicated all that I own unto the Lord. And the religious leaders rubber stamped it. And that's why Jesus was like, you have made the word of God of no effect by keeping the traditions of man. And your, look at me, primary responsibilities as men and women, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, tending to your own family. I know this is hard to hear. See, the church is a family, absolutely, but it must not replace the responsibilities that God assigned to the family. Did you get that? You know another way the church replaces the responsibilities that God has assigned to the family? Parents, the church is not supposed to raise your children. We only have access to them about an hour, maybe 90 minutes a week. The parents are the primary trainers of their children. The church, we support and supplement that.